you know, it's totally insane that you had to, you know, move your entire life. But at
I moved
least
my
it's to a
entire life.
beautiful part of the world, you know.
California was gorgeous, but here, look where I am now. It's like I wake up, I'm in this kind of just dream world,
Wow.
you know, and I usually start my day by just walking down that hill and diving in that blue water. And, it's
Mm,
just kind of fantastic. And
amazing.
I've got this wonderful little apartment. Well, it's not even really very little, it's kind of big. And this apartment in California would cost me probably, $2,000 a month.
Right.
And it's, a few hundred here in Greece. So
Yeah,
I
it makes a
love,
big difference.
I love it. And how are
I mean,
you?
hit. Yeah, all right. I had a bit of a late night as well. I played a show last night, which was good.
Oh,
Really
good.
fun. Um, yeah, it's funny you mentioning the blue water and cheap rent. We've got brown water in the UK because I'm down in Brighton, and we've got
Oh,
all the algal bloom because of all the farm runoff. So all the nitrogen is getting into the sea, causing algal blooms,
oh
and
yeah.
none of the and there's so much going on with the water in the UK. All the rivers are polluted. There's nowhere safe to swim. And we were once known as an island that I think in the Bronze Age we exported water from springs to different parts of
Oh,
Europe,
really?
and now everything is so yeah, the water doesn't generally look blue, but you know some days it's quite nice. Yeah, and we get a nice sea view from the house, which is really good.
That's beautiful. I mean, I love just looking at the sea, but
Yeah, it
oh,
makes a
we're in this like twilight of civilization, maybe,
yeah.
you know, the many of us have just seen the environment of our homes deteriorate in the course of our lives. I certainly have. It's been
Mm.
a major influence on my worldview, on my spiritual path, on my interest in psychedelics. And yeah, it's happening.
Yeah, it's I think you know that's a good place to start is what's happening with psychedelics, and maybe if you want to give a bit of a background to yourself, a bit of an overview for people that aren't necessarily familiar, um, because you've got such a fascinating story, and I think it's interesting where different people within the psychedelic space have had roles to play. And for me at the moment, there's some sense of taking stock of, you know, there's been a lot of this energy that's happened very quickly, and I tend to try and have quite peaceful, low energy, try and take a step back a lot of the time. And now I'm feeling like no one necessarily knows what's going on. There's a lot of, I don't want to say conflict, but there's a lot of people talking about other people. There's a lot of these conversations that are being had in private where people are saying, I'm not happy with how things are going. And other people are saying the opposite. And everyone is, for the most part, seems to be quite enthusiastic about what's happening. And if you are saying something different, you're seen as a bit of a naysayer. And I know you have certainly, and you know, as I said to you last time we spoke, you know, when I co-founded the Kent Psychedelic Society and was involved in the first Breaking Convention, I think we had some disagreements online where I just kind of thought, you know, well, this person's just got a bit of a bee in his bonnet about whatever it is. And, you know, at that time, you know, I was in my early 20s and not aware of the history and how all these different people fitted into the wider narrative. So, yeah, if you'd be happy to kind of tell your story a bit, that would be great.
Yeah, well, that's quite an intro. Um, I know it's fascinating. I've been in a very I started to write a memoir some years ago. Um, I brought all my archives and my collected my library and brought it into one place. My letters, my all my correspondence with people in the psychedelic world. Many of them. like the most significant people in the psychedelic world. I was close with Albert Hofmann for many years, and I knew Gordon Wasson, and I was very close with Timothy Leary, who, I did a book about. I knew Alexander Shulgin very well. I came into this subject in the late 1970s, early 1980s, during this period when psychedelics had sort of vanished from society. There was a big, the explosion of the 1950s and 60s and 70s had kind of petered out. And there was a period there in the late 1970s where it was like silent. And I was a student, a psychology student at the University of California with a student of Frank Barron, who was, only the more, only real psychedelic scholars know Frank Barron because he kind of took himself out of it, but he was really one of the most significant figures in terms of Timothy Leary was his best friend. He turned Timothy Leary on. They were graduate school friends, like brothers, close friends. And Frank had the mushroom experience before Tim and thought that it could revolutionize American psychology and American society, and urged Tim to take it up. And it took him a year of kind of trying to encourage him to do it. And when he finally did, then he and Tim started the psilocybin project at Harvard, and then all this chaos began. And so Frank was my professor at the University of California, and I was interested in altered states. I was really more interested in meditation and yoga and things like that. But how to use psychological methodologies to articulate the effects of meditation and the benefits of altered states. So that's the direction I was going in. But I was starting to get interested in psychedelics, and he really encouraged me and thought that it was time. Enough time had passed since the madness of the 60s and 70s to make another go of researching them in a not in a medical model, but in what we called a meta-psychiatric model for creativity, for just a study of the mind. And so that's really how I got into it. I was in my last year of college. And then it's really remarkable how this life of mine unfolded so rapidly. It was like a calling. The subject of psychedelics really called me, and I organized with Frank's prodding. We organized a large conference at the University of California in 1981 that was called The Future of Consciousness Research. And I was just a beginner in the field, and we came up with a list of names. We did this with a very interesting fellow named Peter Stafford, who wrote a couple of very important books. One of them I still think is one of the best books on the subject, called The Psychedelics Encyclopedia. And so we put together this conference in 1981, which was the first time that all these characters of the psychedelic world had gotten together in quite a few years. I mean, we had Alexander Shulgin and Stanislav Grof and Timothy Leary and Andrew Weil and Terence McKenna, who wasn't even Terence McKenna yet, came, and Oscar Janiger, who administered LSD,
Oh, wow.
And all these people just came at very short notice. No money was involved. It was just like we threw out these invitations, and 1,000 people show up at the university.
Wow.
And I was so struck by the enthusiasm and just this wow, that I decided to defer my admission. I was going to go to the University of Chicago to study religion and the psychology of religion, but Stan Grof invited me to come to Esalen to be his assistant and student. And so I went to Esalen instead and just sat at Stan Grof's feet for many months and was his student, very close student. And we it just kind of unfolded very quickly. I had MDMA during that year in 1981, and it was quite amazing for me. And I thought, I'm just, a kid in my kind of early 20s, MDMA was, no one knew about it. It was not illegal. Stan said, if you want to know more about this MDMA, see, I thought at the time, like, wow, this is going to be the perfect drug to kind of reintroduce psychedelics, because it's not as, it's kind of an intermediate psychedelic, I called it. It was gradual. It would open up these realms of consciousness without the shock or the confrontive effect that LSD sometimes had. And so I went up to see, he said, you got to go meet Alexander Shulgin. So I went up to Berkeley and met Alexander Shulgin, and I said, you know, I just want to learn everything I can about psychedelic drugs. And I had this MDMA and it was really amazing. And he said, how can I help you? And I said, well, can I get some more of that from you? And he laughed at everything. And he said, well, no, I couldn't do that. And then he leaned a little closer to me and he said, but I can teach you how to make it. And so the next thing I knew, I, you know, brought up a couple of chemists over to his place, and we made a small investment and had this state-of-the-art laboratory at the University of California. And suddenly we had a kilogram of pure MDMA, pharmaceutically pure MDMA, made with the, you know, finest chemical equipment. And then I had that, and, you know, so many things. I mean, I was thinking about, you know, the other day, Jim Fadiman, right, who is, you know, internationally known now as the father of microdosing.
Mm.
I listened to a talk of his the other day. He's a good friend of mine, of course, and I taught him microdosing. I was the one that introduced the concept to. He had never heard of it before. Of course, microdosing was something that we in the underground had known about for a long time. But Jim had never heard of it. And when I suggested that he try it, he said he was having a little bit of writer's block finishing his book. And I said, well, why don't you try microdosing? And he said, microdosing, you know, what's that? I thought, you don't know what microdosing is here? And I gave him a little LSD in a bottle and told him to take, you know, 10 micrograms every day for a while. And well, of course, he just, you know, this is one of the things about the modern psychedelic movement. It's fascinating to me how that happened. But anyway, Jim called me he was giving a talk at MAPS, and he said, he was saying how he first heard about microdosing, and he mentioned me, and he called me, I love this, he called me a great but not well-known hero of the psychedelic movement.
Mm.
And that's a great place to really start. Like, what does that actually mean? Like, why am I a great hero? And why am I not more well known? You know, like we could really unpack that thing there. But
do you think, and I wonder, you know, touching back on what I said, you know, in terms of my involvement with Breaking Convention and the Kent Psychedelic Society, certainly when we set up the society in 2000, it's like winter of 2009, January 2010, and when we did that, it was very much in reference to the academic side of things, but the scientific side of things, the necessity to legitimize what we were doing. Because, you know, we had a lot of people coming up to us at the Freshers' Fair, where we'd have a stall and ask us things like, oh, you know, you get together in the woods and take drugs. And we say, no, actually, it's really the opposite. We have scientists come in and present their data and graphs. And I think there, you know, from my perspective, been an overwhelming push of this narrative. And I think...
sorry, an overwhelming what kind of narrative?
There's been an overwhelming push, like people pushing this narrative of, you know, you could call it scientism, where everything is deferred to the scientific experts. So then,
right,
if there's people coming in and maybe challenging that dominant narrative,
Yeah.
then it kind of leads to energy being put out where you'll be seen as someone who just wants to spoil the party, rock the boat.
Yeah.
And I think people are very quick to kind of make those judgments and just say, well, you know, you're not involved with the scientific research. You haven't worked hard enough, whatever, to get there to do the clinical trials, and you're just a bit jealous, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this was something that I noticed at the very beginning, um, is that different groups sort of clamoring for control of the psychedelic phenomena. And I've been kind of working on a book and working out some thoughts, and I've got this book in the works that's called Altered States of America: Psychedelic Movements of the 20th and 21st Century, because although really there's one family of drugs, we can all agree they're these psychedelic drugs, maybe ketamine is on the edge because and MDMA is not, and they're the classic psychedelic drugs, the plant-based ones with an ancient history. But there's one group of drugs we can all pretty much agree these are psychedelic. One group of drugs, but many different groups of people, different agendas that are in there trying to do their thing with them. So there's the scientific community. There's the legitimate, as you're suggesting, the legitimate scientific community that has their methodologies, their paradigm. But then there's also, it's interesting to see how it all kind of bifurcated or trifurcated, or what do you say when things break into four, from the inception, from when Albert Hofmann discovered LSD. Right away, there were two movements. Albert gave it to Sandoz to do their pharmaceutical stuff with, and they sent it off to doctors, and they started to try to make sense of it that way. But he also kept some, and he took it with his German Swiss philosophical friends, who took it and had, like the very first experience that Albert had where he thought he had gone temporarily crazy. And so the psychomimetic model got started, but he also felt sort of enlightened by this descent into madness. So it began this other perspective there too, that it wasn't crazy, wasn't like what the medical scientists were calling temporary psychosis. It was philosophically illuminating for him. So right in the very beginning, there are these two groups. And then, of course, there's you can't talk about the history of psychedelic drugs without talking about the secret societies, the CIA and Mossad and British M6 and the Tavistock. And so there are another series of movements or agendas. There are people that use these. Timothy Leary. What Timothy Leary set out to do with the psychedelic drugs is absolutely the opposite of what the CIA. He broke from the CIA. Or you take a guy like Timothy Leary and compare him to even Richard Alpert, are very different points of view and uses of psychedelic drugs. And so there's
Timothy, certainly I've been chatting to people about kind of Tim Leary's perspective on the internet and how he spoke about it quite positively, and in essence, have we maybe lost this psychedelic philosophy, psychedelic spirituality? People like Terence McKenna, Robert Anton Wilson, Tim Leary, where they're seeing psychedelics in a way that you could actually, I don't want to say hack reality to make, create a different paradigm where we're kind of using psychedelics intelligently, using things like the internet to benefit people, to create more connections and creativity and innovation in more democratized, decentralized ways. Whereas now I read an article yesterday that said the internet's actually disappearing. so there's less internet, there's less web pages than there were last year. There's 20% less than there were 5 years ago. So I think about things like Erowid, you know, which to me, you know, my early 20s was the place we went to for things like psychedelics. And it kind of seemed like, oh, cool, psychedelics, internet, this decentralized place where there's forums, where there's people talking, where you can ask questions about different combinations of drugs. It really seemed like these two things could have fused together in a really interesting way. And instead, it seems like we're losing that, and everything's being funneled into not one narrative, but a few dominant narratives. And I wonder if, you know, and I guess where I'm coming from is, has that revolutionary aspect of psychedelics been lost a bit, that kind of anarchic or anarchistic way of doing things, where it's a bit more kind of punk rock or whatever you want to call it, where it's not necessarily pertaining to these power structures.
Right. I mean, you know, this is to me the most fascinating part of the whole phenomena to me. You know, I've said this before in other podcasts. When you go to, like I did my graduate work in religious studies, and when you go to a divinity school to make a career out of studying religion, you have to make a choice whether you're interested in the phenomenology of religion, of religious experience, of mysticism, the actual, you know, experience, or whether you want to study the history of religion, which is different, you know, like how religion has appeared in all different cultures throughout time, or the sociology of religion, you know, how does religion, religious experience fold into society? How is it used? You know, the religion in literature, how it's written about. And I think it's important that when we get into these kind of conversations about psychedelics, that we be clear of what we're talking about. And right now we're beginning to get into the sociology of religion. Here's this group of drugs. I mean, the sociology of psychedelics is what I mean to say. And to me, again, as more like a spectator and an instigator of this modern movement, you know, there's such a wide range of people that are using them. Like there's the plant medicine community, you know, the really organic and holistic and into nature, and you know, all those things that we can say and enjoy about the plant medicine community. And then, as you've suggested, on a completely other end, you know, there are the kind of cyber community and the internet people. And you know, I would go to these gatherings, many of them that I organized myself or was an attendant of. And you look at the people, and you know, there are some people that are, as I said, like totally holistic, into nature, you know, wearing organic clothes, eating pure foods. And then on the other extreme, there's these, you know, cyber people, and they're like, you know, they look unhealthy. They're like totally out of their bodies. They're in these, you know, mystical states and then there are the medical community, and they think they're really the most authoritative, and they've got permission from the government, you know, they're those guys. And so to just to look at all these different groups and their methodologies and their intentions and their agendas, I think is you know, a fascinating and important inquiry now. You know,
yeah, I mean, yeah.
I was just going to say, it's not, you know, I like to, and Tim Leary would do this a lot too. It's like sex. It's like the psychedelic experience is like the sexual experience. It's like lovemaking, or it's like sex, let's put it that way. Because look at all the different ways that sex is used throughout history, or just in our modern life. Look at, I mean, on the one end, there's sex as, you know, that's the most positive and amazing and wonderful and religious. One of my great teachers, the historian of religion, Mircea Eliade, used to say that the sexuality was the last vestige of the sacred in the modern world. the transcendental experiences and the unity, and how wonderful is sex, right?
Yeah.
But on the other hand, there's the sex industry.
Yeah.
There's the exploitation, there's rape, there's child trafficking, there's sex for blackmail, there's so you take this one amazing phenomena, and all the different ways that it is taken apart and used for totally different reasons. So and yeah, you mentioned like my reputation, which there was a while when I think that when I first really began to take seriously some of the so-called conspiracy theories and the collusion between secret societies and social engineers, Tavistock, CIA, when I began to realize that the collusion of these occult forces, meaning hidden, have on the dominant expression of psychedelics and medicine, then I began to first of all, very angry, because people that I had known and worked with and trusted and felt really honored by their attention began to realize that there was another layer, and that there was a certain dishonesty in what they were putting out publicly. And I could trace that whole thing. Like, I remember one day I mentioned Gordon Wasson. Gordon Wasson, one of the most important characters in the modern psychedelic movement, right? Terence used to refer to him as the Moses of the modern psychedelia. And I was very privileged and lucky to get to know him and visit him at his house a number of times, and long conversations. He invited me to live at his home. He liked me. I was this young, smart person that was going to try to bring this subject out of obscurity and controversy and try to clarify it. And then I, like, there's a story of psychedelics, the narrative. You see this narrative repeated again and again and again in the modern psychedelic renaissance. Like Michael Pollan, right? He's one of the most popular voices. He's been appointed to be the new voice. No books in the whole history of psychedelics have come anywhere near selling what his book, How to Change Your Mind. Suddenly, this guy who is my age and never tripped in college or anything, and suddenly he's written a book that is a runaway bestseller and repeated again and again. And he's like started this program at the University of California, Berkeley, and he's part of the thing at Harvard, the best universities. He's like the world expert. He repeats this narrative. And the narrative is simply that, here's psychedelic drugs, and they were first discovered by, let's say, Albert Hofmann, and then Gordon Wasson finds this mushroom, and then they're starting to work their way into society through the psychiatric profession, and there's research, and they're showing all these good effects. And then Timothy Leary gets a hold of them and makes a mess of them and popularizes them as tools of a counterculture and an anti-war movement. And so the government had to make them illegal. And that Timothy Leary ruined it for everybody. How many times, when you read Michael Pollan's book, does he take a shit on Leary for ruining it? How many times have you heard that? And now there's, over the last, 20 something years, with guys like Rick Doblin, the great hero, and this group of Imperial College and
Imperial
the best
College,
they're coming back, and they've overcome the curse of Leary, And now, once again, psychedelics are working their way into society to have this benefit for humanity, right? That's the narrative. Well, that we really should take that. We really need to look at that narrative, which is very misleading, and see who it's serving and what it's covering up. And so I think I began to do that. And these people that are legitimized by that narrative are a little threatened by an alternative perspective that kind of undermines their importance, or at least shows who their puppeteers are. So I don't know if that sheds light on some of the things that you're talking about. So
Yes, it's interesting as well. I was kind of thinking about different people I know within the psychedelic space, and in terms of you know, being one of the most important but least well known people, I wonder if there's something where there's not enough focus on, I don't know, elders in the community, people that have had this story to share. And instead, what I find when I go to psychedelic conferences or events or anything, it's a, you know, I'm in my mid-30s, but often it seems to be people that are younger than me and people that are really just, I don't, you know, it feels like a bit of a hypnotized state. They're just so wide-eyed, and this narrative is just being lapped up. You know, this whole
right.
story that you just described, it is, everyone is like, yeah, totally. Yeah, it's all gonna be amazing. We're gonna change the world. We're gonna have net zero trauma, all of this stuff. And it's, I I worry that there's not enough kind of jaded people actually attending these
Uh-huh.
events. So maybe there needs to be a little bit, because you know that jadedness is actually comes from critical thinking and the ability to pick apart narratives and say, well, why has that story been set out that way? Why is it that these figures are promoted who have not necessarily been in the space for very long? You know, what is that about? And I think, I don't want to say there's kind of naivety, but often if I have these conversations with people that are a bit younger than me, it it just goes over their head, or it makes them feel a bit uncomfortable, and then they're just like, I'm not really sure what you're getting at. Um, and yeah, I mean, I've had it even just kind of brief moments of saying things in a talk, and realizing, you know, I'm like, okay, I haven't read the room and I can't actually go down, you know, it's just a very quick point and then I can't go down that point. um
Yeah. Well, I commend you for your efforts to introduce critical thinking into this wave of psychedelic enthusiasm that is my analysis, not just mine, but
yeah.
there are a lot of important scholars, and this is one of the reasons that I feel more encouraged and happier about coming out and having these conversations and doing podcasts and writing another book, is that I'm sensing that there's a growing great pushback against this kind of totalitarian, monolithic psychedelic I call it the enterprise. When you
Yeah.
look at you know, the publicity in the major media of the, you know, I'm not quite so tuned into the UK, but and even though I live in Europe now, I still pay a lot of
Mm.
attention to the United States. But there's an enterprise. Again, Pollan is one of the great voices of the enterprise, and there are certain key individuals that are really always mentioned as the leaders. We
Mm.
mentioned a few, you know, like Rick Doblin is one, Bob Jesse is another one,
Mm.
Pollan. You got that group over at Imperial College, Jim Fadiman. You know, there's a really small group of people that's causing this thing to happen. And and then, you know, a lot of young people, there's been a tremendous success to the weaponization of the concept conspiracy.
Mm.
you know, like in the US especially is what, again, what I'm most familiar with. President John Kennedy was murdered back in 1963. You weren't even born yet, but I was a 6-year-old person. And I remember that. And I remember how the country changed, the mood. And a lot of people were, and then this Warren Commission report came out, and it said that Kennedy was killed by this one crazy guy who was, a Marxist or something. And I was too young to really pay attention, but there were a lot of people, older than me, who started to realize that's bullshit. It couldn't be like one guy. And then not only didn't he get a fair trial, but he himself was murdered right after that. Like this whole thing was like, what the fuck? And so people started to look into this, started to raise their voices and say, but books started to be written. Well, the enterprise that actually killed Kennedy had to come up with something to dissuade this growing current of people that were realizing, like, wait a minute, this isn't right. So they weaponized this phrase, conspiracy theory. Oh, they ridicule, you're a conspiracy theorist. And it was very effective. Social psychologists have found that one of the most effective ways to marginalize someone or a thought is to ridicule it. Ridicule. Like people are very vulnerable to that. And so that continues today. And that to me, that's a very important and super interesting phenomena to really look into. Like why how the success of the weaponization of conspiracy theory. Because really, if you want to understand what happened historically, what's happening now, the given stated thing is never the true thing. There's always something going on underneath that, right?
Yeah,
You want to understand. Go ahead.
I've often been kind of called a conspiracy theorist about many things. And I studied politics at university, where I'd be reading through textbooks and it literally saying, in 1956, the CIA colluded with Anglo-American Oil Corporation to overthrow the leader of Iran who wanted to nationalize the oil. And it's like, oh, okay, so governments, corporations, they do conspire. I mean, there's so many number of, Coca-Cola, all these different multinational corporations that aren't even like the 1% secret billionaires. It's the, the brands that do all this horrible shit in the world that conspire to sell more products and not have people oppose, like putting a fucking Coca-Cola plant in the middle of the Colombian rainforest, and things like that. And all these power structures that keep it very well oiled, keep the money constantly rolling in. And to me, it's kind of like a denial of reality, just wanting to stick your head in the sand. No, you're a conspiracy theorist. It's too difficult to pick this apart. It's too uncomfortable. I don't want to have to make certain choices about whatever it is, the food I buy, the people I listen to. I just want to be able to carry on, and I think as well, we live in this interesting state of fear. And I really noticed it from 9/11. I know you speak about 9/11 a lot. I know you've been pulled up by people for talking about 9/11 and made
I've been what? Sorry?
You've been pulled up by people online. People have been quite uncomfortable about you speaking about 9/11 along with other conspiracy theories. But for me, I was so aware, I was only 12 years old. But I was so aware that, okay, now something is changing. This is big, big, big stuff. What's happened now, watching it on the news. I remember sitting with it and just being like, and I'd gone on holiday to New York, I think the year before, and, gone past the Twin Towers and being like, oh, wow, I was just there. I'd, experienced the giant, power of Manhattan, all these massive buildings, and then realized, oh wow, okay, it's actually been, attacked or whatever, has happened to it. Something has changed where this significant image, which is just constant, you know, hypnotizing image of the towers going down, you know, I'm like, right, there is something which is being carved here to correct us. And, you know, things like the Patriot Act are still in force in the US. We're still living under the Terror Act in the UK. None of these things have changed, even though supposedly we're living in a safer world because we've had all these wars which are supposed to protect us. But, you know.
Yeah. It's so funny. I'm glad I'm delighted to have this conversation with you, and thanks for reaching out. I you know, just yesterday I put a thing on my Facebook page. That's about the only like social media presence. I'm being a little lazy now in my life. I'm enjoying my life so much that I'm not really. But just for some reason yesterday, I saw a 9/11 video and I wrote a commentary on it. And I just took it down this morning because I never heard that phrase. That's a British phrase. You're pulled up means you're criticized or
Yeah. If someone pulls you up on something, it's like,
yeah,
no, come on,
okay.
mate, you're chatting shit, and they'll, you know.
Yeah. So I took it down. But you know, I'm like twice as old as you, I guess. What are you in your 30s?
35.
Yeah, so I'm mid-30s. I'm 67. And so my life has spanned this period where I was aware of the Kennedy thing and how that was you know, that was a state-sanctioned execution. And the people that have really studied this know. And then, you know, with like the United States was a coup. The
I
United
mean, I
States
even remember seeing the Zabruda documentary in school, you know, in my teens, and being like, well, this is clearly bullshit.
Yeah. So that's another fascinating thing to me as a social psychologist. Like the people who can see it automatically and say that's bullshit versus the people that are just you know, accepting the mainstream view.
Yeah.
And
Well,
I've
there's
written
the Bill Hicks bit where he's talking about the, you know, the book depository and how there's like a bit of glass and like a sniper gun set up, and there's a bit of glass so you can't get to the window, because if you got to the window and looked at the road, you go, there's no fucking way. Like, I can't even
right.
see the road. He's like, there must have been anti-Castro pigeons like flying Oswald over the road to be able to shoot him.
Yeah. 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 And so you know, that though not just the JFK, but the RFK assassination and the Martin Luther King
Yeah.
assassination, you know, if you know, look at these, you know, and then, you know, years go by and now there's the new century and 9/11. And it was you know, major. I took a very deep dive. I spent years really studying. I basically have a PhD in 9/11 and how people perceive or don't perceive that. And it's really one of the most significant events. And the cover up of it, and then the way the general population processes that information is very interesting to me now living in Europe, and, you know, sometimes raising this conversation. How many more European citizens, it's so much easier for Europeans to, oh, they knew it right away that it was bullshit. And, you know, it gets into like, what are the factors that cause Americans the greatest difficulty in seeing this as, and it's the very same thing that we see occurring in, say, people who are Catholic to or children who are abused by their priests or by their teachers, and how they very often will repress that information, not perceive it, because the cognitive dissonance that it causes, like these are people who are my parents or the priests or my teachers who are, I depend on them for my very life. They can't also be the ones that are attacking me. And so that same kind of thing happens with something like the Kennedy assassination, or more modern, the 9/11. people, we're raised in America. We're raised, we say the Pledge of Allegiance, and our country is the greatest thing. We're use that word hypnotized. We're hypnotized. Well, not just Americans, but Americans are hypnotized from the time they enter school to believe that that God loves us the best. We're the best country in the world.
Yeah.
So you can't tell me that my country, with my great government, and we beat those tyrannical British monarchs, we're a democracy. You can't tell me that that our government looked the other way or did that kind of thing. Like, it's much easier to say guys like me or like you're bad because you're threatening the very integrity of my psyche. And so, I think the same thing helps explain why, conspiracy, why it was easy to weaponize that phrase conspiracy theorist, because you're attacking the very, basis of my existence. I get it even with some of my British friends. I make fun of you guys because you still have this crazy thing with the king and queen. Like, what the fuck is that?
It's insane. Totally bonkers.
So,
do you think there's a similar thing with psychedelics, and that people have, I was thinking about it this morning, like, do you think the type of people that are promoting psychedelics maybe it's all just been wonderful and amazing, they haven't necessarily had many bad trips, or possibly because of the type of people that they are, the bad trips are a badge of honor, and it's something that they've struggled through, and it builds them up. And I guess, from my personal perspective, the actual taking of psychedelics, the actual experience of psychedelics has become less to do with my personality, less to do with my narrative, more to do with, I don't know, using them for creative inspiration or meditation or spirituality, but less and more about how do I interact with people, what do I think about life, what do I think about peace, love, war, all of this kind of stuff. I'm not so wedded to this narrative. Do you think that there's a lot of people who have maybe felt quite lost in life, and the psychedelic subculture has been very useful for a lot of people? And people like Rick Doblin, he's not just the chairman of MAPS, he's also going along to conferences and going along to after parties. He's a psychedelic celebrity. These people are celebrities. They're not just boring fuddy-duddy scientists. The people that are studying gene therapy or whatever it is, the kind of crazy innovative scientific research, they're not celebrities in the same way that the psychedelic scientists are celebrities. So I wonder if there's something where people are just so precious over it that if you do come in and say, hey, do you know what, maybe this whole, I see so much in terms of like legalization, regulation, just promoted, and not much challenging to this narrative. Right. And then if you challenge it and say, well, this kind of feels more like control rather than widening access, people get very, very precious about that.
Yeah, some people. These are, I think we're outlining some the really important issues, at least the ones that fascinate me these days. And it's it may be instructive to go back into history for a minute.
Yeah.
And to as I said at the beginning, I see there are psychedelic movements.
Yeah.
Same drugs, people using them for very different reasons. And we can talk about two very basic different ones. These drugs are used to wake people up. By other people, the very same drug are used to control people.
Yeah.
Okay. So if I say the name Solomon Asch, does that, do you know who that is?
No.
Okay, let me give a little sketch here because it's important.
Yeah.
Solomon Asch was was like the founder of the field of social psychology. He was a Polish immigrant to the United States, a very brilliant psychologist, and he became interested in the idea of conformity, and how did he watched, you know, Nazism spread in Europe, and he was struck by how did, like, all these wonderful people that were democratically oriented, you know, fall for these atrocities and all this bullshit of the Third Reich. It swept through Germany, swept through Poland. And so he became interested in conformity, and he conducted this very brilliant study, which, like anybody that's studied psychology at all knows this body of research. And so here's how I'd like to explain it. Imagine that you're a college student and somebody comes up to you on the campus and says, we're doing a test of eyesight. You want to take part in this examination, we'll give you $5. And you say, sure. And you're led into a room, and there's 19 other people in the room. Now, you don't know this. Those 19 other people are all part of the experiment. You think they're like you, just brought off the street, but you're the only one being tested. So you're in this room with 20 people. The experimenter goes to the chalkboard and he draws 4 lines. One line is 4 inches. One line is 8 inches. One line is 6 inches. And then there's a line over here that's the same length as one of these. Okay, follow me? And you're asked, which of these lines is the same length as that line? It's obvious. The answer is obvious. The experimenter goes around the room, and every single person gives the wrong answer. And now it's your turn. What do you do? Now, when I ask it like this, every single person says, well, I would give the right answer. But actually, when Solomon Asch did this, and these are some of the most repeated experiments in social psychology, something like 75% of the population, and these are at schools like the best schools in the United States. He did this at Yale, Swarthmore. 75% of the population defies their own senses and gives the wrong answer in order to conform to the group. The socially constructed reality of the group becomes the dominant reality, even though it is obviously false. Okay? So that's a recipe for fascism. When people conform to a group opinion, even though it's obviously wrong, and they defy their own senses. So here's where the psychedelics come in. Because my teacher, who I mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, Frank Barron, was a graduate student at the time. And he was interested in those 20% that didn't conform. Why are they different? How do we get more of those people? And so he moved back to the East Coast and started working with Solomon Asch and started doing personality tests and assessments of the non-conformers. And he began to develop his career, and those were called them the creative personalities. And then in certain, aspects and parameters of their personality, like the people who conformed, some basic things. I won't go through the whole list, but their view of nature. Like people who conformed typically had a view that nature was something to be protected from. Whereas the non-conformers thought nature was friendly. They could blend with nature. Nature was something beautiful to harmonize with. Other people, it was cold or whatever. You had to like erect structures to defend, stuff like this. There's a fascinating and rich body of research. I'm just giving you some of the basic points. And another had to do with, and I love this concept a lot, the locus of control or locus of authority. Does your authority rest in yourself? Do you have your own inner compass? Or do you displace and project authority onto institutions or authorities or the church or your teacher or your parents? Have you this internal locus of control? So Frank was in the midst of doing this kind of research and traveling and meeting creative people and wanting to figure out how to, because he was part of a group, he and Tim and a number of other social psychologists in America were aware that America was becoming fascist, authoritarian. People were just following, like we just had World War II, Russia was our friend. Suddenly there's this Cold War and Russia's bad, like this whole new reality is being socially constructed.
Yeah.
Right. And to some people, it didn't make any sense at all, but there was a whole, like, the culture was going along with it.
Yeah, it was like the weaving of the American narrative throughout the Cold War, this real construction of, America being the best, Russia being, the bear, cold.
Yeah, it flipped. It was like it happened in like instantly.
Yeah.
They went from, the Russians were the ones that they beat the Nazis, really.
Yeah, the Russia, yeah, absolutely,
And suddenly they're the bad guys. How did that happen? To
Yeah.
really look at that period and like what happened to the, that gets into stuff that people don't really want to look at. And it's but anyway, so Frank is on a research project in Mexico interviewing creative writers. And that's where he's introduced to the mushroom, to the psychedelic mushroom. And he has this experience that is completely, transformative for him. And he thought that this would be the key to getting more people to recognize the tremendous power of the individual, to shift that locus of authority and control from the institutions, which were corrupt, to our own, innate moral and ethical sense of rightness. And so that's why he started to do this research with the psychedelic drugs. And to me, it's fascinating because, I'm a student of his, and I'm kind of looking at the long range effects of this, and I wonder, well, has it worked? Did this experiment that became just like, within the universe, within Harvard, and then they realized that a lot of this was controlled by the CIA. So Tim and Frank, mostly Tim, took this calculated risk to popularize the psychedelic drugs, to free them from institutional control and popularize them. And they knew that there would be madness and chaos, but they thought it was worth it to take this risk and Tim said this near the end of his life, the most important thing that he did was free these drugs from the CIA and give them to the people. He knew there would be pushback. He knew he would be, sort of martyred, but he loved it because that was just his personality. He loved to be famous and do controversial things and say, fuck you to authority. And so, I did a little study after 9/11. It wasn't a formal study, but I went around and had conversations with many of the most prominent people in the modern psychedelic movement, who were my teachers or friends or colleagues or students. I was really involved in this. And pretty much, I would ask them, like, so do you think 9/11 was an inside job? And pretty much everybody said yes, except two outrageous exceptions. Rick Doblin, who said, no, I'm 99% sure that the official story is correct. And Roland Griffiths, who said, he and I were friends and had kind of a long debate about that. And I just realized eventually he's not gonna, you can't bite the hand that feeds you, right? He's been pushed up into prominence as the new great friendly wise man of the psychedelic spirituality movement. And he's not going to, that 9/11 is, as you've noted, people, I get, what's that, pulled up for saying it, That's because people, they don't want their illusions pierced.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, this point about, internal and external authority, and whether you think 9/11 was an inside job or not, there seems to be, and I wouldn't even talk about like a necessarily, there is the lack of kind of critical inquiry, but what I find interesting with the psychedelic space is that there are these certain institutions of authority, like the military industrial complex, like the British aristocracy, that aren't being challenged. And I think Amanda Fielding is very lovely. I've had very nice interactions with her, but I also think maybe similar to Roland Griffiths, is there something of propping up this very sweet, kind, slightly kooky aristocratic woman, and now she's a nice, old lady, and it's, if you were to say something like, well, the institution which is promoting psychedelics and has put loads of funding into psychedelics, owns 92% of the land in England. Like, people in the UK don't have the right to all of their land is built on the death that, all their wealth is built on colonialism, all this stuff. And it's, if you say these things, it's just such a big conversation.
I know
that people are like, no, I brought it up to the Sussex University Psychedelic Society, and it caused a bit of it was just on a WhatsApp group, and it led them to like turn off the conversation on the WhatsApp group because it was getting a bit too heated after. And I didn't really say anything that extreme. It was just when Beckley Foundation came out and said, we need to do a scientific study of the mystical experience, and I literally said, is anyone asking why? Is anyone asking why we're deferring to these institutions to tell us about something which should come from essentially our internal compass? And from, I said, has there not been enough study over thousands of years into the mystical experience? What is this needing to refine our understanding and codify it from, get the stamp of approval from either Beckley or Imperial and say, here we go?
Yeah, I know. You're getting into some stuff, man. It's one of the frustrating things I feel about doing podcasts like this is that we get into some really rich and complicated, multi-layered material that really takes a long time to sort out and look at from different points of view. And yet, typically we only have this whatever hour or two to get into them. And like you mentioned, Amanda, and I can say that, first of all, I love Amanda. When I first kind of broke through, when I realized that Wasson was not just a banker who was on a hobby that found mushrooms and wanted to share them with the world, but that Wasson was actually a very highly placed operative of the intelligence apparatus and the global fascist movement, and that his expedition and the publishing of it in Life magazine, that was the shot heard round the world,
Hmm.
started this whole, popularized these
Yeah.
things, was the beginning of what I call the Brave New World project.
Hmm.
They were looking at another way to distract society from the political and economic developments that they had planned, to concentrate the wealth and resources of the world in a very small, basically a continuation of what the Third Reich and, the oligarchic, operation. And I realized that, and so I became a little bitter about that. And I would sort of step back and kind of reevaluated everything that I'd learned about psychedelics, people that I'd worked with. And Amanda came up in that, because I had gotten to know Amanda very affectionately, and thought all those things that you just said. And um, I would fire off little angry, snarky little comments, and this is how I got this reputation that you're talking about. But I'm saying this now because uh, last year, not even a whole year ago, um, I was invited to come to Athens, Greece, to speak about the Eleusinian Mysteries and about the book, The Road to Eleusis, that I republished a couple new editions of and added material. I wanted to bring that topic up. And Amanda was invited also. And so I spent 4 or 5 days with Amanda and Jamie in this beautiful villa. I'm in Greece right now, just over there. And we reconnected. And I was, very forthcoming with my conspiracy theories, and, not like directly attacking her,
Yeah.
because I don't want to attack anybody. I just want to like say that. And it's so, anyway, she and Jamie are, well, they're so lovely. You've hung out with
Yeah.
them. And and I couldn't sense anything nefarious about Amanda. It's not her fault that she was born into that strata of society, and it's not Jamie's fault. And we're not going to give away all their money. They really do genuinely want to try to make the world a better place. They're not revolutionaries. I mean, they don't want to change the structure or the, distribution of wealth. I mean, I used to like, and, Doblin's another one. You get, I mean, how ironic is it to get a letter from the Beckley Foundation or from MAPS? Doblin comes from a super wealthy family. And, you know, Amanda and Jamie are like looking to raise money. And I think, why don't you sell one of your castles or something, So you just joke around. It's just much, much better to have a kind of sense of humor and grace,
Yeah.
you know? And I don't feel that about Doblin, who I do sense is a really deeply psychopathic and nefarious character who has a political agenda that's very hostile to the spirit of democracy. And he's a charlatan and glib with spiritual values and abusive and dishonest. I don't think that at all about Amanda and Jamie.
I mean, so on that note of, political agenda, and where do you kind of see the connection between what's happening with prioritizing veterans to treat them over, anyone else who's a victim of warfare or other types of trauma? What is it about this agenda which is so centered around, is it just that, okay, well, because I've spoken to people from, I don't know if you've heard of this charity, Heroic Hearts, in the UK, but it's, prioritizing treatment for veterans. And, I spoke to someone from that, and they were quite candid and said, well, look, this is the way in which we get psychedelic therapy over the line, is by, speaking to the right wing, talking to them about veterans. That will help promote it. Do you think that it's more nefarious than just simply, this is what the right wing like to hear, and once we get veterans treated, then it will disperse and democratize out to society, and then we can help treat other people.
Yeah. So, this is another one of these very, very rich and complicated issues that I've been criticized for speaking out against, because how can you be against the healing of battle-scarred veterans? And but I do feel that the application of psychedelic drugs to battle-scarred veterans is one of the most atrocious developments of this Renaissance. And so let me try to explain where I'm coming from here, because you can make a point that first of all, let me say this, that for a long time, I worked underground as a therapist and as a guide, and helped a lot of people deal with trauma, rape victims, and kids who went over to Iraq and saw what was happening and were deeply traumatized, and I helped them with psychedelics. So you don't have to tell me that they can work. But for the United States Army to be administering psychedelics to the kids whose lives they've destroyed with their bullshit wars it's like the rapist giving their rape victim a drug to get them to forgive them. Right? And this gets into a deeper issue about the psychological ecology of the situation. Like these kids who have we're talking about just veterans now, who are suffering from PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. They have the disorder. They went over there. They believe they went over there because they were forced to go over there because of the economic conditions of their life. And the Army offers you can't work on the farm anymore, or all the industry has been sold over to overseas or whatever. Then the Army just says, well, here, we got benefits, you go to college. They got 9/11, they attacked us. And so these young, good-hearted men and women, sign up and go over there to fight for democracy. And then they get over there and they realize, holy fuck, this is completely wrong. I'm not fighting for them. I'm the invader. We're the Nazis. And they start freaking out. And they have no place else to go. They can't. So they start freaking out. They kill themselves. They ruin their life. The suicide rate is 20 or 30 a day.
This is more than active service people that have actually been killed.
More people are killed from suicide than from the so-called enemy. This is a major public relations disaster for the architects of these wars. Another way I try to explain it, I put it in context, is imagine it's by 1937 and Hitler's troops are being ordered to go into different communities and round up the Jews, the kids they went to high school with, and they're taking them out of their homes and they're putting them on trains and they're sending them off to concentration camps. And suddenly these German boys are freaking out, wait a minute, this is wrong. I can't do this. And they start dropping out of the military. They start showing psychiatric symptoms. They start killing themselves. That would be a public relations disaster for the Third Reich. Now imagine some Nazi pharmacologist comes up with a drug that heals that condition. They would be lauded as a hero in the Third Reich. Oh yeah, they saved the. That's what's happening here with this. Those kids that are suffering from so-called PTSD because we first started to see it, in the Vietnam War, because they had to shoot up a village of
Yeah,
children,
yeah,
or, and they're freaking out that they're like, they don't have a disorder. They're the only fucking human beings in the whole war.
yeah, right,
The
yeah, yeah,
people
yeah,
that have the disorder are the ones that are ordering them to do it.
yeah.
The ones that are kissing up to the government saying, oh, yeah, well, I need to pay my rent. So give me a job, give me a rifle. Or they're
Mm,
sitting in computer rooms, and 5,000 miles away, like bombing children
yeah,
or
yeah.
weddings. And those are the sick people.
Mm,
It's not the people that are suffering from post-traumatic. Yes, let's treat them kindly with all the techniques that we have.
yeah,
And the best ones, by the way, are just like returning to nature, walking in
yeah.
nature, like really reconnecting with your humanity.
Mm,
But to get these, people like Rick Doblin who are about to make a fortune giving MDMA sessions for $15,000
yeah,
for
yeah.
4 sessions. So that you read the recent articles about him, like, oh yeah, well, we're not trying to end war. We're just trying
Yeah,
to,
no,
keep
it's
the
crazy.
keep the
Yeah,
soldiers healthy so they can keep fighting,
yeah. Well, it's this
right?
this concept of net zero trauma is really worrying.
That's such
Um,
bullshit.
yeah. And I think, for
So
me, it kind of, coming back to this kind of internal authority, and going back to what I said about, like, maybe some people haven't had enough bad trips, that, like, I feel like there's been a lot of times where I've had difficult experiences, probably with something like LSD, that's like a long period of time where I'm able to kind of sit, often if I'm doing it by myself with my thoughts, and there'll be times where I'll just kind of be sitting and meditating on the world and what is going on, and just kind of locking in. And I would say in that state, I would feel very viscerally about war, about people being killed. It would give me a bad time. And so I guess from a personal perspective, I'm often quite curious as to why there aren't more people having those kind of thoughts, and just kind of being on these drugs and thinking and freaking out and being like, holy shit, guys, we're fucking killing each other like we've never done before. Why are we doing this? Why aren't people raising the alarms at, I don't know, these after parties of psychedelic conferences where people are tripping? Everyone's just like caught up in this bubble.
well, let me stop you there because I think I don't agree with that right now
Mhm.
because I have, after a few years of just like dropping out of the psychedelic thing, doing my own thing, I've been coming back and speaking out more. And like, let's see, a couple of times over the last few years, one time at Harvard, I stood up and raised a question and stood up and raised some of these issues. Um, in Athens here last year, twice I raised my hand and stood up and raised some of these issues to the panel, challenging them, saying some of the things I just said to you about
Mm.
the PTSD,
Yeah, yeah.
some of the notes that we've covered in our conversation. And the people up on the stage are aghast. Oh, fuck, who let that guy in?
Mm.
But the audience, a couple of times, I got standing ovations
Wow.
and people coming up to me afterwards and saying, God damn, I'm so glad you said that.
Mm.
That's happening. So I
Okay.
I sense I sense that there are a lot of people. That's why these
Yeah.
podcasts are important. There are a
Yeah,
lot
yeah,
of people,
absolutely.
and we need to get it more well known that we are the majority.
Mm.
We are the majority of humanity are peace-loving, conscious, good-hearted people that are appalled at what is going on, that our government, that our leaders are
Yeah.
doing.
I had a chat recently with, Nashay, after she put together um, that paper. I added my signature to it. But the really positive takeaway from that conversation was her talking about having more conversations like this with people, potentially trying to create, and I know you've spoken about this, some kind of alternative conference where it is more the humanity side of things, the countercultural side of things, where people are coming together and celebrating I don't know, the strangeness, the weirdness, the fun aspects of psychedelia away from this other narrative that, you know, can maybe just continue as it is. And, you know, maybe in a positive way, it's kind of allowing or creating that opportunity for something more revolutionary to happen in the space.
Absolutely. It's a great idea. I would love to be help it happen.
Yeah, yeah.
I would help fund it,
Cool.
and I would like to be part of it.
Awesome.
Because to go back to Solomon Asch,
Mm.
so when I described the first experiment where there were 19 people who all gave the wrong answer, if there were just, instead of 19, if there were 17 and 2 people said, no, wait, you know, gave the right answer, that had a dramatic impact on the person who was being experimented on.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right? There's 19 people, they all give the wrong answer, 80% go along with that. But if there's only 16 or 17 out of 19 that give the wrong answer, that number goes way down.
Okay.
So that's why, that's first of all why somebody like me who becomes expresses themselves, they're so quickly canceled by the enterprise. Don't let that voice out. Because they know, the enterprise, the social engineers know the volatility of the field of consciousness that they're trying to manipulate.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you say, you know, there's people I know in the UK that have felt marginalized in this sense as well, and not, or, you know, people that were previously involved with certain organizations which, you know, have now gone in a certain way, and they've challenged that, and then they've been pushed out very quickly. And, you know, they've described it, they've described the, you know, totality of everything as like a hostile business takeover. This is what it feels like. There's certain people that are being positioned, certain narratives which are being weaved. But yeah, I mean, I do, you know, regularly meet up and chat to people who are sharing similar narratives.
Yep.
And I guess it's just a case of making those connections more consistent, and, you know, seeing where, you know, kind of counter narrative can actually be taken in terms of like a conference or publishing something, or getting something out there that's more than just having conversations with people.
I agree. I'm all for it. You know, a book, it'd be very easy to put together a Zoom conference with voices like ours, Neshi.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm in touch with a lot of people who recognize the truth of that what I'm saying, not just me. I'm not the only one. I'm just one person. I have had a unique life in terms of helping this thing start and getting to know these people, and having been part of the enterprise myself, perhaps, you know, being and then as soon as I realized another story, I was like, whoa, 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 okay, forget about you. And it was
Yeah, I mean, I often um like I've struggled a little bit in this space in terms of, I don't know, career and these kind of things. I've been, you know, on the fringes somewhat, and often I think, God, it would have been so much easier maybe from like a financial perspective just to totally, you know, go fully into it. I remember when at the Kent Psychedelic Society, and we had Rick on a Zoom call, you know, this would have been, you know, over 10 years ago, and he, you know, in quite a vague sense, but he was very much like, oh, you know, yeah, if you guys want to set something up, you know, kind of student-led, MAPS funded initiative, I'd be all for that. and you know, when he said that in the room, you know, I had people, oh, nudging me, oh God, you know, that sounds
Yeah.
great. And
Well, that's how they
I've,
control us. Money.
yeah, yeah, and I often think like, wow, what would have been, but you know, I remember uh walking back from a meeting that we had at the society, and my friend Cameron Adams, who was one of the directors of Breaking Convention,
I remember
he
him.
said, yeah, he said to me quite specific. He was very clear, and he said, "Don't think about monetizing this. You know,
Right.
this is a student society. Don't think about taking it and turning it into something." I was like,
Yeah.
okay. And then you, and now that's what kind of everyone else has done. There's organizations which are putting on talks. There's people making lots of money, carve careers out of it, and
Yeah. Incredible. It's so fascinating for me to see
mm,
that. That first conference that I organized,
yeah, yeah,
free, free.
yeah.
We like borrowed money to put stamps and mailed these things out, and 1,000 people came. It was totally free.
Mm.
And it started, and a couple of years later, Doblin enters the thing, this money hungry, greedy bastard, trying to monetize everything and turn psychedelic conferences into a fucking industry.
Yeah, I mean that's a really interesting point. Like one of the people I've been speaking to who's felt a bit disgruntled with the space and talking about breaking convention and really interested into how much involvement MAPS has in breaking convention and conferences in other parts of the world. I mean, you know, breaking convention last year, there was supposed to be the closing ceremony, and it was after Rick's talk, but Rick spoke for 45 minutes longer than he was supposed to. And I think, you know, I think one of the, you know, directors from Breaking Convention kind of hinted like that you've gone over. And so many of us have this regret of not being the one to stand up and say, oi, you've gone over by a long time now,
Mhm.
and we're waiting to do the closing ceremony. It was this real kind of fear of, fuck, I can't be the one to say this. I can't be the one to literally have, you know, 1,000 people or whatever it is to turn round and be like, you know,
Mhm.
it's this real command of authority in that space to just be like, no, I'm going to speak for longer. No one's going to challenge me. And maybe it is this, you know, as you said, money is a way of controlling people. And it's like, well, we best not upset Rick Doblin. I mean, I
Mhm.
upset Rick Doblin over money, over a very small amount of money, because he maps when we put on this psychedelic comedy night before Breaking Convention 2019. Maps gave us some money. We hired out too big of a theatre. We didn't sell enough tickets. We ended up owing Maps, you know, I think a couple of £1,000, not, you know, not a huge amount. Um, and then it like turned into a big kind of thing between me and Breaking Convention.
Mhm.
I was like, but I mean, they've got, you know, billions of dollars or whatever. I mean, it kind of seemed like there was energy coming from Maps about this thing, that it was, you know, I don't know, some sort of not necessarily hidden, but
Mhm.
slightly shrouded power behind conferences like Breaking Convention and others, you know.
Oh yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I
I
like
got
to
to
call
call.
things grassroots. You know, what does grassroots mean in this space? Can you really do anything necessarily for free, or you know, it's a weird one.
To me, it's just astonishing to have, gotten interested in this field as a modern spiritual revival and, back to nature, holistic thought, um, challenging, questioning authority. And then when Doblin entered into it, I don't know if you know my story, but I was running this underground MDMA project.
Mm-hmm.
I had a lab, was not illegal. I was working with Shulgin, and the idea was that I was going to give MDMA to people, and pretty much for free or at cost, which was just like pennies. Like for $500, you can make, MDMA costs like less than a penny per dose to make. And I was giving it to people and asking them to just write up their experience. You were supposed to, they agreed to keep it secret because it wasn't illegal, and we wanted to keep it that way. We were aware, our little group that was forming, that the mistakes of the 60s were the excessive popularizing of something that throughout history had been kept kind of secret.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The Eleusinian mysteries, like you couldn't talk about it.
Yeah.
You go to, in the indigenous uses of
like
ayahuasca.
The shame, it's like everyone's a shaman nowadays, and it's like, well, no, the shaman would be the one person to go away, take the, whatever it was, go to the forest, go and sit there, come back, and then, share. Yeah. But not everyone needs to have that experience.
Yeah, these were mysteries. These were secrets. They're not right for everybody. What a psychedelic can be administered to one person and have a very profoundly beneficial effect. The same psychedelic to another person can be very destructive and activate egotism and narcissism and all these things. So this was the major rule was, we're keeping the secret. We don't want the government to know about this drug. We want to build a broad base of support throughout a responsible, therapeutic, and spiritually, metaphysically oriented community, artists. So that's what I was doing. And I was turning people on all over the place. It was a fascinating time. Well, this is how Rick Doblin got his first MDMA.
Yeah.
One of my associates gave it to him. And of all of these people, I don't know how many there were. Did it reach 1,000? Maybe. It was a lot of people, including some real characters in the world, like celebrities, and it was fascinating. I should really write all that up.
Yeah.
Doblin was the only one. Not only did he not keep the secret, he calls the federal government. He basically snitched out our project. Wow. He calls the federal government to tell them that there's this new love drug that people in Northern California are using, and therapists are using it, and it has all these great effects, and it's not illegal. He called Reagan's drug czar. He called the media, and he pushes himself gets identified as the Timothy Leary of the 80s, as the person, and helped make it become popular, and was one of the main reasons that MDMA became illegal. Mm-hmm. Because of and he was also, then he hooked up with this other guy that had a big Doblin is just a drug dealer. When I met him, he was bragging to me about how he had been busted for dealing cocaine to college-aged kids and somehow used his family wealth to get out of his bust. He was like, he typified what went wrong with the 60s. Mm-hmm. That people just got drugs and they were fun, and they used them to fuck girls and just be outrageous. Mm-hmm. And there was no spiritual or metaphysical or psychological framework. It was just for fun. Mm-hmm. And Doblin got into that and was a drug dealer, got busted for coke. And I think that's when he made his deal with the underground. And then his family connections, his Israeli Zionism and all this stuff. And somehow this guy then just gets his name in all the papers, ingratiates himself with the government as the voice of this new love drug. And within a few months, MDMA went from a secret sacramental adjunct to therapy to the most popular recreational drug in the world. And that's when he starts this MAP scam, begging from, I'll make this illegal, I'll make this legal, and we can use it. Just give me your money, and all these. This is another thing about psychedelics, is that they in some people, a lot of people just makes them hyper suggestible, overly trusting. They lose their critical faculty. And somehow this like least psychedelic person that I've ever met, just a money hungry, you know, guy, got to brand himself as a psychedelic activist. And now look at it, you know, he's like begged money, collected millions of dollars over the last, whatever, 40 years to, under the pretense that he's going to make MDMA legal and we're going to have a psychedelic society. But now, and then like just a few years ago, whatever, he switches. It's not a nonprofit anymore.
No, yeah, no, it's Lycos.
He's going to, all these people that do, he's a caricature of fascism, a caricature of rapacious capitalism that preys on the people to feather his own nest. And now he's used the millions of dollars that he's gathered from just psychedelic people to assert the therapeutic benefits, fudging data, abusing people. I'm glad all this stuff is coming out.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, you know, it's kind of like in this situation, I'd like to, you know, it's like I'm thinking of how to play devil's advocate, how to maybe challenge this narrative.
You mean my narrative or his?
Yeah,
narrative?
your narrative. Which
okay, please.
I'm not saying I personally challenge.
No, we can do it.
I'm just wondering, but I'm kind of, I don't know where I think possibly before everything that had come out, you know, really recently, it might be a bit easier to play devil's advocate and say, well, you know, it seems like they're doing a lot of good. It seems like a lot of people are being helped. It seems like maybe some of the stuff that's not so great was like one or two bad eggs that were involved, not necessarily that directly with maps, right? But it seems like a wider, you know, that paper that Nishay put together, it goes into quite a lot of detail about the different aspects of the organization, and it doesn't seem like it's just, you know, a few incidences of things going wrong, but overwhelmingly people are being helped. I don't know what it seems at the moment. I don't know, you know, we're not, I can't imagine there's been necessarily enough research and data done to overwhelmingly say definitively these things are helping people from the data that we show, right?
Look, I don't buy this medical model of showing drugs effects, and psychedelics are even more complicated. You know, I'm very familiar with you know, decades of people that work in the underground that administer these drugs in secret. They charge a fee. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
They're really conscientious and they're secret, and there is a natural, organic development of the healing power of psychedelic drugs. There's no doubt about that. Thousands of people, and it's growing. And that's what's one of the good things about this renaissance, and I really believe that. You know, I'm still involved with that. You know, I'm a practitioner and I'm a mystic, and then there are the money hungry people that are align themselves with the obviously profoundly corrupt medical establishment, medical pharmaceutical establishment. It's obviously corrupt.
Yeah.
And so like, you know, we're saying it's a kind of tricky conversation to have, because Doblin has just gotten himself in a position where he's the face of that, where all he is just like a businessman trying to market it for his own money.
Like, yeah, I mean, that's what we, you know, the talk he gave at Breaking Convention, you know, it was very much a marketing pitch. It was very much like a talk that you would give to investors.
Right.
And for me, that's where the scientific medical model, you know, is the thing which is most important for these types of people, because actually then you can say, look, we've got data that we can repeat, we can show you, please give us more money. You know, they constantly have to get more you know, waves of funding, so we need to do more research and then go back to the people to say, look, it does work. And
you shouldn't have to go through
yeah,
these
yeah,
structures. You know, I
yeah,
was
yeah.
I was an American citizen for the first 67 years of my life, and we're a country, and one of the most important principles is the separation of church and state, and that Congress pass no law. A person's right to religion is their own business. And then along comes, you know, they make this Controlled Substance Act in 1970, which makes all these psychedelic drugs, which we know is where religion comes from. You know, it's one of the oldest, most continuously practiced religious experiences in all of human history, and they're illegal. And if you want to explore this realm, you have to go through, you have to ask the government for permission. Well, that's total bullshit. I'm getting a battery warning here. I got to
No
plug
worries.
in. Yeah, I got it right here. So I'm a real advocate of the mystery school model now. You know, if you look at the books that I've published, you know, the last one that I put some energy into was getting the concept of the mystery school back into the conversation. And the mystery school is, you don't talk about it. It's silent. Talking about it profanes it. Talking about it draws in the wrong energies.
I mean, that, you know, for me, with the study that I've done into mysticism, particularly exploration into Taoism, where, you know, the first line, I think, in the Tao Te Ching is like, you know, if you can utter it, then it's not the Tao. And you know, I often say, going back to that conversation on the Sussex Psychedelic Society chat about Beckley doing a scientific exploration, it's like, but surely the moment that you start to do this scientific inquiry into mysticism, then you've lost it. It's gone. You're trying to kind of capture something which can't necessarily be put into a study.
It's very tricky because you know, I want to disagree with you a little bit.
Yeah.
Mysticism, so the word science is another thing that gets misused and taken over by authoritarians or by materialists, because the way I look at things, mysticism is scientific, like yoga, meditation. These are scientific procedures. They say, if you do this and this and this and this, you'll get this result. You know, you change your diet, you eat wholesome foods, you behave in wholesome ways, you think in this way, you manage to rein in your wild thoughts and still your mind. If you can do these things, when you do these things, then your consciousness changes, your reality changes. This is scientific. That's basically what science is, like a repeatable formula that you can share with somebody else. And so, you know, we have to be careful when, and so again, you know, Amanda and I hung out last year, less than a year ago, and got into this stuff. I think it's fascinating to apply certain methodological rigor to really looking at what mystical traditions have been saying over the years. But we have to be very careful and mindful about who is funding that and what's their reason for funding it. I don't think that science is a nefarious thing. I think the United States government and the FDA and the DEA and the Controlled Substance Act and the secrets is the CIA, those are nefarious. But there is a way, there are, like when I said at the beginning, the different psychedelic movements, I'm perfectly comfortable. I love what a lot of scientists are doing to understand like neuropharmacology and develop a better understanding of the mind. Science can be a really great ally to helping our world become a more holistic and loving place. It's unfortunately been commodified and exploited by a predominantly militaristic regime that is spearheading so many of the activities in the UK and in the United States, and it's just in Israel, and it's just totally repulsive.
Yeah.
But somehow they've gotten to be identified as the legitimate forces because whether they're sitting in the White House or the halls of Congress or the Parliament, but in actual fact, when you look at them, many of them are the most corrupt and vile people that the world has ever known.
Yeah, yeah.
So
do you think it's possible for us to kind of free science and free scientific inquiry from these institutions and democratize it a bit more by having these kind of conversations, and I guess talking about science in a different way, as you talking about with
absolutely.
yeah.
I was around Cambridge for a couple of years, and I had, a few really interesting conversations with people that are getting involved in that Harvard project there. There are a lot of, again, I say the majority of us are aligned with the kinds of things that we're talking about here. And that the more of us get together and the more of us talk about this, there are people that they're not mostly like Rick Doblin. Rick Doblin just gets the light on him because he's, sold what little soul he has to these dark occult forces to control the most important thing in life, which is, the Great Spirit and the entheogenic access to it.
Yeah, I mean that's a really important point, and I think that inner spirit, not even from like a necessarily the creation of the God within, but the getting in touch with that inner spirit, that inner drive. Certainly I find from a creative perspective as a musician that psychedelics have overwhelmingly been the thing, really specifically as well, LSD has been the thing to bring me right back into myself with music and creativity and keep that spirit alive. So I think it's it's important to engage more within the mystical side of things and different ways of inquiry, because I guess my worry is losing that. Does it get lost in conversation? Is there sometimes I feel like, well, how much relevance is there for artists in the psychedelic space in terms of leading the conversation?
Well, that's when artists lead artists, do they even want to be part of the conversation?
Well, that's
the
the
artist,
thing,
their conversation is more, it's not centralized, it's more like independent. There are artists who are, and enter money into this whole thing. It makes it so much more complicated. I was thinking at the beginning when if I'm going to write about this, like, well, I'm supposedly a great but not well-known hero. Like, well, why am I not so well known? Well, one is because I'm shy about this. The other is that I'm not like seeking anything. Like the mixing of money, like my money things, that's totally different than my philosophical outlook, just because of whatever, good fortune or something. But I've never wanted to make any money from this. I've never wanted to go down into that dimension with it. It's just like you look at the history of religion, and whenever money is involved, it's usually problematic, selling of icons or relics, and it's a profaning of something. And it's complicated, Rich. And art is the same way. Like you probably know as an artist in your music, that your music is the best when there's no thought of gain, or you're just in that zone, and you're playing.
I mean, that's the silver lining to the music industry being totally fruitless, financially, is that everyone is really in it for the love and being in that state of flow, and just vibing and having those interactions and getting excited to see other people do well. I think that's, yeah, the interesting thing I find in, you know, certain spaces is like, well, how much do other people want to see other people do well? How much is there like jealousy happening? And, you know, you see it in the psychedelic space and all these other kind of spaces. But I think certainly, you know, where I find psychedelics to be useful is that kind of community building aspect, the slightly more left-wing, revolutionary, whatever you want to call it, grassroots aspect, where, you know, we're not afraid to sit in the forest, you know, get a bit dirty, not have to have everything so kind of perfectly shiny and laid out, you know.
Yeah. I told you, coming to the UK in August.
Yes.
My wife is doing a thing at the Medicine Festival. I don't really have any plans. You said you're not able to make it that time because you've got some
Yeah,
gigs.
I'm playing at a festival that exact same time, but if you're around either before or afterwards, it'd be great to link up.
Let me see as we get closer, but I would
Yeah,
like to and let's circle the wagons and have
yes.
get some people together and do this Zoom call. We can get some very articulate voices to support the perspective that we are sharing here, and get a lot of other people listening. We could produce a book.
Yeah.
And it'd be nice to have some alternative for the general population to appreciate.
Yeah, definitely.
All right.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah.
It was
No,
a real
thank you.
pleasure.
Yeah.
Nice
I look
one.
forward to seeing you whenever that is.
Yeah.